Once upon a time, there was a game called Street Fighter, and it fucking sucked. The end. Most people's introduction to Street Fighter was Street Fighter 2, but, and stay with me here, Street Fighter 2 was not actually the first game in the series. In 2022, Street Fighter 1, for better or for worse, exists solely as a footnote in the history of competitive gaming, and if Street Fighter 2 is the Wright brothers and their first aircraft, then Street Fighter 1 is the Da Vinci flying machine. Kinda charming and goofy in retrospect, but completely non-functional and could potentially kill you if you tried to use it. Even ignoring all the gameplay issues and gimmicky controls, the reason no one really cares about Street Fighter 1 and everyone loves Street Fighter 2 is that the sequel introduced the idea that you don't have to be Ryu. Games can take liberties when it comes to what can and cannot exist within the realm of competitive play that traditional sports and competition cannot, and they're better for it. In football, everyone has the same equipment. When traditional sports try to innovate, you get slam ball. They're just not allowed. Some of chess's greatest minds get to a certain echelon and end up finding the game incredibly boring. Magnus Carlsen is the best player in the world and just up and decided it's a trash game for babies. Bobby Fischer got so fucked up on the idea of pure algorithmic chess play that he went full Joker mode and made chess 2. Sure, some competitive esports follow the same principle, but that's not what this video is about, so as far as I'm concerned, they don't exist. Player skill and personality have the potential to drastically change how the sport in question is played, but, you know, giving one guy in one of the teams a gun would change it even more. Fighting games are equal parts player personality and giving different guys different guns, which creates an asymmetrical game state that is sometimes in favor of one player or the other, but almost never exactly equal for both. It makes for a more dynamic gameplay experience, which is obviously a plus, but it comes with the caveat of being a nightmare for balance and fair play. With varying character parameters comes the inevitability of some pieces being better than others or having inherent advantages from the hop. If you were to ask any given fighting game player on Twitter how important balance is, the first thing you'd notice after reading the responses is that you've got an unexplainable nosebleed for some reason. But the second thing you notice is that they mostly seem to think it's paramount to having a good gameplay experience. It's the holy grail that all fighting games should strive for. But, like is usually the case on FGC Twitter, they're full of shit and don't actually have any idea what they're talking about. Look at Multiverses. That game gets patched 9 times a week purely on the whims of what some 13-year-old with top player in their bio doesn't want to learn the counterplay to, and the result is that you might take a bathroom break and come back to find out that Iron Giant is now a unicycle. Learning how to play around each enemy with different tools and strategies is where competitive games really hit their stride. Balance can be frustrating, but character variety is the greatest strength the genre has at its disposal. And today we're talking about a monster that embodies that ideal, whether it wants to or not. Plant has a storied history when it comes to strength in Monster Rancher, and a lot of that can be attributed to the fact that it's functionally a defensive character in a game where every other character wants to get a KO. It's got maximum life gains and an extremely quick guts regeneration rate, allowing it to constantly attack and soak up damage. An incredibly long lifespan makes up for its otherwise bad stat gains and gives you the time you need to train it up. Notably terrible offenses coupled with the lowest average tech strength in the game force it to play by its own rules, and depending on which game we're talking about, what that entails differs drastically. Plant in Monster Rancher 1 is the most oppressive monster the series has ever seen when controlled by a human player. This is due to how strong its withering techs are and how low the relative damage of the meta is otherwise, meaning running the clock is usually optimal. Plant is unparalleled in its ability to slow down the pace of a match, but if you don't have the time to waste, it's even a pretty strong physical attacker and a good meta pick for AI-controlled competitive play due to a bug making root attacks critical hits do an insane amount of damage. Because of these strengths, Plant was unbalanced, and not really in the fun way. Queen Plant does not have a single even or losing matchup in the entire game when controlled by a human player, and only really struggles if it gets nuked in the first few seconds of a match. If it hits first, it's almost guaranteed to win. In Monster Rancher 2, the overall game mechanics allowed for way bigger damage numbers on average, with the trade-off of a less frenetic and more methodical AI behavior that wouldn't constantly attack. These changes make the gameplay significantly differently from the first installment, but actually work to Plant's advantage. If Monster Rancher 1 Plant was ported unchanged to Monster Rancher 2, it would be a catastrophic blow to the game's balance and would be functionally unbeatable for 2/3 of the cast. We're out of the realm of no losing matchups at this point. We're in losing is not possible territory now. So understandably, the devs knew they had to do something. And boy howdy did they ever. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. Let's run through Plant's text first to see why Plant is the way it is in Monster Rancher 2. Plant's basics are god-awful, but if nothing else they serve as a cautionary tale regarding the diminishing returns that exist on hit percent. Slap has a great +8 hit for 11 cost.
That's good.
And 7 force with a noticeably long animation time.
Ooh, that's bad.
Slap's singular use is running the clock down, which isn't something you can really rely on in AI vs AI. Even with max power, you're lucky if this tech ever breaks triple-digit damage. Jab is much faster and has an additional 3% hit over Slap for a lower cost.
That's good.
But it's got 6 force. 6 force is just like really funny. A real funny man's move. It doesn't have much use, but in a pinch you can use Jab to finish off an opponent who procced Grit, or to simulate what it's like to punch yourself repeatedly in the balls.
That's bad.
Root Attack also has 6 force.
Can I go now?
And double the accuracy and a bit of withering and sharpness for 3 extra guts over jab sounds great, and I mean, it is better. But this move only really works to take out speedy monsters with bad defenses when used with a huge guts lead spammed repeatedly. It's really just not enough damage to make a lasting impact. Root Combo is the last step in the first of 2 tech chains Plant has, and they both have an interesting distinction of only needing 25 uses of their prereq to unlock, meaning chaining Plant's techs are incredibly simple and can easily be done in a single tournament. Root Combo doubles Root Attack's damage for a pretty hefty jump in cost, but given Plant's incredible guts regen, it's an easy cost to justify. Root Combo has a significantly longer animation time on hit, but still usually ends up being the better deal for damage when spammed because of guts correction affecting multiple successive root attacks more harshly. It's just better, and Root Combo ends up being a necessary grab on any power-based plant, which isn't actually as unusual of a build as you may think. And believe it or not, Plant has 2 heavy techs. Not really the monster that comes to mind when you think of big damage, and despite being a heavy, Jab Combo doesn't actually do much to break any preconceived notions you might have. 15 Force makes it weaker than a handful of the better basic techs, and it has the dubious distinction of being the weakest heavy tech in the entire game. Slightly stronger than Root Combo for a bit less guts at the cost of a ton of accuracy, Jab Combo isn't incredible, or even good, but it covers up Jab well enough along with Root Combo to make up the main crux of Plant's low but consistent damage output. Plant Combo does significantly more damage, but at 25 Force that's still not a lot and has a really rough -11 accuracy attached to it. 25 guts for this tech on a monster with a slower guts rate would be in the running for one of the most non-viable techs in the entire game, but it's not, and guts rate does a lot to stop it from being completely unusable. It's still really not good, but an additional bit of withering means this functions as low cost damage output and control versus tanks, which are an archetype that Plant tends to struggle with on the power side. Phase Drill is Plant's final power tech, and fitting for a special tech, it's the crown jewel in the arsenal. Extremely low force for a special tech at 21, but the accuracy, withering, and manageable 35 cost make this far and away Plant's best all-purpose attack. Against tanks, you want to be either using this or Plant Combo at every given opportunity, and against speed monsters, Phase Drill excels in dropping the opponent's life low enough that it can be dealt with via one of the many other cheap, 60% and above accuracy techs that Plant can spam ad nauseum. Every single power-based Plant build picks up Phase Drill. You'd actually be sort of crazy not to if you plan on winning. So Plant's got a lot of accurate power techs with comically low damage numbers, and I don't think that's really surprising to anyone. The thing doesn't even have real limbs. So let's talk about the stuff that made it a menace in Monster Rancher 1, his intelligence attacks. Off the hop, Seed Gun already fills a completely different role than Root Attack despite sharing its cost and force. Trading accuracy for high critical hit rate, more withering, and an absolutely obscene animation time, Seed Gun single-handedly does a lot to fix the holes in Power Plant's gameplay, and it would be a welcome addition on any mixed attackers to allow for extra low-cost damage output. It won't hit as reliably as Plant's power options, but with a critical hit chance approaching 40% max, even coming off of a low force number, you can afford a few misses. Seed Galling is a pretty natural progression from Seed Gun. More damage, more crit chance, higher cost, longer animation, and notably less accurate. It's the closest thing Plant's got to a heavy tech on its intelligence side, and with nearly 50% crit with the bad-natured stress bonus, it almost actually fills that role. Galling plays a part versus tanks and can get clutch 1 hits on frame 1 versus monsters who are especially frail, but it's maybe not as generally useful as Seed Gun. It's a burst option that should be used more sparingly. Plant's whole shtick in Monster Rancher 1 is that it did next to no damage and instead relied on withering to force its opponent into a checkmate situation where it was never able to attack. We've seen the whole no damage thing in spades up until this point, but not so much the withering. Toxic Nectar is kind of a strange tech. Very accurate with horrendous damage, the withering should be the main reason to use this tech, but mostly due to how powerful Plant was in 1, its withering potential was severely nerfed in 2. Nectar costs more than it withers for 80% of the time, which I suppose can be forgiven due to Plant's guts rate being as good as it is, but with no damage backing it up and a decently long animation time on hit, you usually only really break even on the guts you manage to remove from your opponent. This move is completely unusable versus fast guts rate monsters, and especially those with the Anger Battle Special. Often in that situation, throwing out a Toxic Nectar is just giving your opponent the advantage for free. Toxic Pollen in Monster Rancher 1 on a 6 guts rate Queen Plant is the most egregiously overtuned tech and monster combination in the entire franchise. And so it was nerfed dramatically. Pollen is no longer the powerhouse it once was. Questionable hit rate craters the consistency of this tech and leaves it in a niche where it's good versus slow guts rate mons and those with no speed, but hardly performs at the level it used to. Just like Nectar, it withers for less than it costs more often than not, so it's relegated to being a tech that you pick up just because your other options are limited and not because it's particularly good. Despite being primarily known as an intelligence-based monster, we haven't seemed to have had much luck with Plant's intelligence techs, have we? Well, Lifesteal is here to save the day. What's that? A drain tech that isn't completely ass? Yeah, it's crazy, I know. Lifesteal is far and away the best drain tech in the game. The damage isn't particularly crazy, but a 50 guts cost is an expense Plant has the luxury of being able to afford, and an even 50-50 hit percent makes it a worthy candidate for one of the most reliable options for a huge comeback in the entire game. What would be a fun gimmick on most other monsters ends up being necessary damage output in slot 1. Lifesteal is probably the reason you're planning an intelligence plant. Other than a couple of outliers, the majority of Plant's techs range from technically usable to bad but required. There's no real optimized tech loader for Plant like there is for most of the other monsters we've looked at so far. On the power side, your main choice is which of the heavy techs to get, with Plant combo to fight tanks and Jab combo versus everyone else. On the intelligence side, you unfortunately can't cover up slot 2, so Jab will be staring you in the face all fight. Toxic techs aren't great and really only serve the purpose of slowing down the pace of the match. If you're not in the lead, this isn't really ever desirable, meaning they're inconsistent at best and game losing more often than not. But they still serve a purpose of brutalizing tank builds, so they're not without merit. Seed Gun versus Gatling is another decision you have to make, though usually you'll end up getting both. So the real question is, which one do you want active at the start of the fight? Gatling serves as burst potential and a strong life lead with the ability to transition into a withering based playstyle, whereas Seed Gun is a non-committal potshot to get the ball rolling without much risk and allow for lifesteal to work its magic later. Queen Plant is the best plant you can run competitively. It has the best guts rate and starts with a low enough nature to make acquiring lifesteal doable in all versions of Monster Rancher 2. Plant can effectively use both anger and power, and does so better than a lot of other monsters. You can also run Plant as both a speed-based monster and as a tank with either of the above battle specials. This is pretty rare. Normally you can't run an effective speed-based monster with anger, and tanks with power are very inconsistent. But Plant seems to avoid these issues specifically due to the adaptability it has going for both chip damage offense and withering or drain defense plays. It doesn't particularly excel in either of these roles and struggles pretty badly with damage upkeep versus most opponents, but what can you do? Keep in mind that in DX that most fresh off disc Queen Plants start with Ease, a battle special that boosts your evasion and cuts your guts cost on consecutive hits or dodges, with the caveat of doubling incoming damage. This is great on speed builds, but this also means that you need to get rid of it through combination before running Queen Plant as a tank, since Ease is terrible if you're not able to dodge. Plant unfortunately doesn't really function in competitive play the way you'd expect it to, but the truth is under AI control much of the same was true in Monster Rancher 1. It's a monster that requires timing and strategy in a framework that doesn't know how to use either, meaning its strongest iteration is relegated specifically to fights with human control. Plant is a balanced nightmare. Make its withering too strong and you make it an unbeatable behemoth. Make it too weak and you have an unusable bastard. But the Goldilocks zone is always much easier to talk about in theory than it is to put into practice. Plant may be weak, but its power level also serves a thematic purpose. As much as it needs one, giving Plant a huge nuke just doesn't really make sense thematically. Its low damage potential and interesting niche fills a role not seen elsewhere in the game, and that personality helps keep the game interesting. It's a noble sacrifice. If Plant had the same options as everyone else, it would be stronger, but the game would be worse for it. Balance can be the death of variety, and variety is what keeps people playing Monster Rancher 2 long after the age of Slamball. I guess what I'm trying to say with this whole thing is that this means that the best real-life sport is obviously BattleBots. One guy has a drone, one guy has a rake that fucks up drones, one guy gets a saw, one guy gets a spatula attached to a piston strong enough to flip over your mom. There's different weapons and maybe it's not really balanced, but who cares? It's cool as hell. Go play Street Fighter 1, you fucking nerd. Thank you guys for watching another one of these. I love Plant, too bad it sucks. If you love Plant and you're sad that it sucks, be sure to follow for more upsetting truths in the future.